I'd been at NorthBridge Consulting for 8 years. Not a lifetime, but long enough to know every corner of that glossy glass office. Every whisper in the hallway, every look exchanged in the elevator, every client name stored in the dusty back rooms of memory. They called me dependable, organized, quiet. No one ever said brilliant, though. That word was reserved for people like my boss, Clarissa Doyle. Clarissa had been promoted just 2 years into her time at the firm. Charismatic, sharp, and impossible to challenge, she walked through the office like she owned it, even before she officially did. Most people adored her. I respected her. At least I used to. I'm Lizzie Anders, 33 years old, and until last Friday morning at 9:42 a.m., I was the Senior Operations Coordinator at NorthBridge. The day started like any other. I was reviewing a final logistics report for the Baxter account, one of our largest corporate clients, when Clarissa walked in, heels clicking across the polished floor, followed by the intern I'd been mentoring, Ava. Ava was young, just 22 and fresh out of university. Smart, yes. Eager, definitely. But still green. For 3 months, I'd trained her patiently, covering everything from procurement workflows to client protocols. She looked up to me, or so I thought. Clarissa stopped at my desk, arms folded. Her face was unreadable. Boardroom, now. A few heads turned. It was rare for her to use that tone with anyone but suppliers and subcontractors. I stood, confused, heart already ticking faster in my chest. Inside the boardroom, Ava lingered awkwardly near the wall while Clarissa slammed a printed email on the table in front of me. "You sent this file to Baxter without removing the internal projections tab." I blinked. The document was familiar, something I'd reviewed last Tuesday but hadn't finalized. "I didn't send the file," I said quietly. "I passed it to Ava for final formatting, like we agreed." Clarissa's eyes narrowed. "Ava said you told her it was ready." Ava shifted beside her, not meeting my eyes. "I told her to double-check it before sending," I replied carefully. "It was a draft." Clarissa turned to the window, hands on her hips. "Do you realize what this has cost us?" she said coldly. "Baxter's board is threatening to pull the entire account." My stomach dropped. That account represented nearly 40% of our annual revenue. I opened my mouth to speak, to defend myself further, but Clarissa whirled around and pointed a perfectly manicured finger at me. "You stupid girl," she snapped. "You were never the smart one here. You were just convenient." The words hung in the air like smoke. And then she did something worse than yelling. She walked back into the open office, gestured for everyone's attention, and said, "Just so everyone's aware, Lizzie here has been let go effective immediately due to negligence on the Baxter account." Silence, followed by a few uncomfortable coughs. And then, God help them, a couple of people laughed. Whether from discomfort or allegiance to Clarissa, I'll never know. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I simply gathered my things, placed my mug and office plant in a spare box from under the printer, and walked out. My coat was still warm from the morning sun when I stepped outside, but I felt nothing. Not the breeze, not the burn in my throat, not the curious glances of people passing by as I stood on the curb with my box, waiting for a taxi. I didn't call anyone. I just went home. And that evening, while the city lights blinked beyond my window and the warmth of the day faded from the walls of my apartment, I made a single phone call. The voice on the other end answered with practiced professionalism. "Chambers and Low Law, this is Diane." I cleared my throat. My voice was calm. Too calm, maybe. "Hi, I need to speak to someone about wrongful termination and potentially corporate fraud." That night, I hadn't slept. Not really. My body had lain in bed for hours, but my mind replayed Clarissa's voice on a loop. "You were never the smart one. Just convenient." 8 years of loyalty, erased in seconds. A reputation quietly built, shattered in front of everyone I thought respected me, or at the very least understood what I brought to the table. But as I stared at the ceiling in the early morning light, one thing became crystal clear. This wasn't just a cruel outburst. It was calculated. Clarissa hadn't fired me in a private meeting, hadn't offered HR a chance to mediate, hadn't even spoken to me like a human being. No, she'd staged it. A performance, one designed to humiliate, to strip me of any credibility before I could ask questions. And worse, Ava, the intern I'd trained, had stood there and said nothing. The next morning, I sat across from a woman named Eleanor Nash, a partner at Chambers & Lowe. Late 40s, sharp eyes, no-nonsense energy. The kind of woman who didn't waste words and didn't miss details. She scanned the brief intake form I'd filled out and raised an eyebrow. You've never had disciplinary action, stellar reviews, senior role, and this was your first mistake? I shook my head. It wasn't my mistake. Then why would they say it was? I hesitated, then spoke carefully. Because someone needed to be blamed. Eleanor leaned back. Tell me everything. Start from the top. It took over an hour, but I told her everything. The Baxter account, the intern, the final version of the file that I had specifically flagged as a draft. Clarissa's outburst. The public termination. And then I told her something I hadn't admitted out loud until that moment. Last month, I caught a discrepancy in the vendor payment log. I said. There were 2 invoices for the same work. Same vendor ID, slightly different numbers. When I brought it up to Clarissa, she brushed it off. Said the vendor must have made a mistake. And did they? I met her eyes. Number I called the vendor directly. They only sent 1 invoice. Eleanor's fingers paused over her keyboard. You're saying someone created a duplicate payment request? I nodded slowly. And 2 weeks later, I lost access to the payment dashboard. Clarissa said they were restructuring access levels, but nobody else on the team had their permissions changed. She didn't reply right away. Instead, she reached for a yellow legal pad and wrote a single word in all caps. Retaliation. Do you have access to any documents? She asked. I hesitated. Maybe, I have backups. Old drafts, email chains, nothing official, but enough to reconstruct the timeline. That's a start, she said. And Lizzie, don't delete or alter anything. From this moment on, every move you make matters. I exhaled, slowly. The weight in my chest didn't vanish, but it shifted. Eleanor wasn't just humoring me. She believed me. And more than that, she saw something actionable in what I was saying. That afternoon, I returned to my apartment and dug through my personal drive. I had a habit of saving work to my own cloud folders, not out of paranoia, but because I often worked late at home and hated the company VPN. I scrolled back through my project archives until I found the Baxter file. There it was, a draft, time-stamped 2 days before the incident, clearly marked preliminary in the file name, and attached to it an email I'd sent to Ava. Hi, Ava. Please double-check all tabs and remove internal sheets before sending to Baxter. This is a working draft. L. I stared at the screen for a long moment, my hands trembling. The truth was right there, buried in the quiet places no one had thought to look. Then, just as I was about to start organizing the files for Eleanor, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it ring once, twice, then picked up. Hello? A familiar voice came through, low and hesitant. Lizzie, it's Ava. My stomach turned. She continued, barely above a whisper. I didn't know she was going to do that to you. She told me you'd signed off on the file. I was scared. I'm sorry, I cut her off. Ava, why are you calling me? Silence. Then, because I think she's about to do the same thing to someone else. And there's something you should see. Ava's voice was shaking. And yet, behind the fear, I could hear something else. Guilt. I'm sorry, Lizzie. I swear I didn't know Clarissa was going to throw you under the bus like that. She made it sound like it was no big deal. No big deal? I repeated slowly. She fired me in front of the entire office, Ava. I know. I didn't think she'd actually... Ava stopped, swallowed, and then sighed. Can I come over? I have something to show you. I hesitated. The part of me that felt deeply betrayed wanted to hang up, but the rest of me, the part that had spent the last 48 hours piecing together breadcrumbs, knew better. Come, I said, but bring everything. She showed up 30 minutes later in jeans and a hoodie, her normally bright face clouded by something heavier than shame. She looked like she hadn't slept either. We sat at my dining table. I poured her some tea, but she didn't touch it. Instead, she opened her laptop and turned the screen toward me. I took a screenshot the day after you were fired. I wasn't sure why. Something about the whole thing didn't sit right. On her screen was an internal memo, one I hadn't seen. It was a list of departmental restructuring notes dated 2 weeks before the Baxter incident. Right beside my name, there was a single sentence in red text. Pending replacement. Prepare onboarding for Ava. My breath caught. You were going to replace me, I said flatly. Ava nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Clarissa told me I'd be promoted if I took on more responsibility, that it was part of her leadership development initiative. I didn't know she meant... She planned this, I said, cutting her off. She had it in motion before the Baxter email was even sent. I think she's done this before, Ava said, with someone else. Before I joined. A guy in procurement. Henry something. People said he just vanished one day. Henry. I remembered him. Detail-oriented. Soft-spoken. We'd worked on a supply chain project together 2 years ago. He'd suddenly stopped showing up one Monday. Management claimed he'd taken a leave of absence, but he never came back. I opened my laptop and started digging. Henry Walters. I searched his name through old project files, email chains, even Slack archives. There he was. And then, like a ghost, gone. His access revoked, email disabled. No goodbye, no formal announcement. Just like me. Clarissa's MO is simple, I said aloud, thinking more than speaking. She identifies someone who knows too much, isolates them, discredits them, and replaces them with someone easier to control. She's also falsifying vendor payments, Ava added quietly. I froze. What? I overheard her on the phone, Ava said. 3 days before you were let go. She was arguing with someone about how the numbers don't match, and said something like, just duplicate the last payment file and call it reconciliation. I didn't understand what she meant at the time. But I did, and Eleanor would too. I grabbed a flash drive and began transferring files, emails, spreadsheets, Ava's screenshot, the draft Baxter file, everything I had. Why are you helping me now? I asked her finally. Ava looked down at her hands. Because you were the only one who treated me like a person. You taught me everything. You never talked down to me. And I let her use me to destroy you. The sincerity in her voice hit something inside me. It didn't erase what happened, but it softened the edges. And then she added, Clarissa's going after Brian next. Brian from compliance? Ava nodded. He raised questions last week about some discrepancies in our audit logs. She's been meeting with HR behind closed doors ever since a chill ran through me. This wasn't just personal revenge anymore. This was a pattern. A system. I emailed everything to Eleanor with the subject line, "This goes deeper than we thought." Then I called her directly. She picked up on the first ring. I have evidence, I said without preamble. Real evidence, and a witness. Her tone sharpened immediately. I'm listening. As I walked her through the files, the pattern, Ava's story, and the connection to Henry and Brian, her silence was telling. When I finished, she said, We're not dealing with a simple wrongful termination anymore. If what you're saying holds, this is a coordinated abuse of power. Possibly embezzlement, possibly witness intimidation, and corporate fraud. Then what's the next move? I asked. There was a pause. Then, you don't make the next move, Lizzie. I do Monday morning arrived like thunder, loud in my chest, quiet on the outside. I sat by the window with a cup of black coffee, staring at the gray clouds that hung over the city like a secret waiting to break. The documents had been sent, the emails forwarded, the puzzle pieces placed on the table. Now it was Eleanor's move. At precisely 9 a.m., my phone rang. "Lizzie," Eleanor said without preamble. "I just got off the phone with NorthBridge's internal counsel." My heart skipped. They're rattled. "I sent over a formal notice this morning. We're filing a wrongful termination suit, citing retaliation, defamation, and constructive dismissal. I've also included the memo Ava provided, and we're requesting an injunction to prevent the deletion of any internal communications over the last 90 days. I let out a slow breath. And how did they respond? They panicked, first denied everything, then asked if we'd be willing to discuss terms privately. I laughed, dry, humorless. Of course they did. And Clarissa? They claim she was acting on information provided by HR Convenient, but they've already put out feelers. I suspect they're planning to distance themselves from her fast. I didn't reply. Not yet. I let the weight of it sink in. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the culture she'd cultivated, the people she'd stepped on and silenced, the ones like Henry, like Brian, like me. "I have a contact at the Department of Labor," Eleanor added. "They handle whistleblower protections. I want you to speak to them today. Off the record for now. But if we go public, you'll need to be protected." "Protected?" I asked, raising an eyebrow even though she couldn't see it. "You're a threat now, Lizzie. Clarissa knows it. So does the firm." I hung up feeling strange, empowered but uneasy. Later that afternoon, I received a knock at the door. Ava again, her face pale. "She knows," she said the moment I opened the door. "Clarissa?" She called me into her office this morning, said there was an ongoing legal matter, and I was to speak to no one, not you, not HR, no one. And then she offered me a full-time position, starting next week. My jaw tightened. "She's buying your silence." Ava nodded, looking sick. "But it's too late for that," I said. "The ball's already rolling." Ava hesitated, then pulled out her phone and handed it to me. She left the room during our meeting, and She looked away. I hit record. I don't know if it'll help, but I played the audio. Clarissa's voice came through, sharp and smug. "We can't have people digging into every little mistake. What matters now is who's loyal. I've protected this firm's reputation for years. If that means cutting a few loose ends, so be it." My blood ran cold. That wasn't just arrogance. That was intent, premeditated, and on tape. "Ava," I said slowly, "you just gave us the nail in her coffin." By evening, Eleanor had the audio clip. "We'll use this strategically," she said. "Not yet, but soon." That night, I received an unexpected email. It was from Brian. Subject: "I think I'm next." He'd been placed on administrative review, he said. Something vague about compliance inconsistencies. He'd worked at NorthBridge for over 10 years, never had a single write-up. It was starting again. Same pattern, different target. I forwarded the message to Eleanor, then stared at the screen long after the message sent confirmation popped up. This woman, Clarissa, had built an entire kingdom on fear, control, and manipulation. She rose by stepping on the backs of those too quiet, too loyal, too trusting to fight back. But now, the quiet ones had receipts, and we were done being convenient. As I shut down my laptop, I thought back to the moment she fired me. Her voice loud and cruel, the room full of stifled laughter, my dignity boxed up with a coffee mug and a dying plant. She thought she'd ended something that day. She had no idea what she'd started. 3 days later, NorthBridge Consulting froze in place. It started quietly. Just a whisper that something was happening. And then, before the end of the week, it was official. An independent legal investigation had been launched. Every department head was notified. Clarissa, usually the first to hold court in morning briefings, was nowhere to be seen. I didn't have to be in the building to feel the tremor ripple through its walls. The internal announcement had all the polished vagueness you'd expect. To ensure full transparency, the executive team has engaged an external legal firm to review recent employee concerns regarding management conduct and operational processes. We are committed to maintaining the highest ethical standards. But the staff knew. They always do. Behind closed doors, hushed conversations passed from desk to desk. Some whispered that the board was preparing to make changes. Others speculated about Clarissa's absence. One brave junior analyst posted a cryptic message on the company's private Slack thread. Guess the intern wasn't the only one watching. And I watched it all from the quiet safety of my apartment. Every update came through Eleanor. She's being questioned, she told me late Thursday afternoon. They've already discovered discrepancies in the vendor ledger. Payments processed without formal authorization, duplicate invoices, and 3 different reports that appear to have been altered post-submission. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. It's finally happening. It is, Eleanor agreed, but you need to be ready. For what? For what happens when they realize just how central you are to all of this? The next morning, I received an official email from NorthBridge's legal department requesting an in-person meeting. Representation is welcome, it read. That was all I needed to hear. Eleanor and I arrived together at the firm's downtown headquarters. It was surreal being back. The security guard at the front desk didn't meet my eye. A few familiar faces glanced my way, then quickly looked down. No more laughter this time. We were escorted to a glass conference room overlooking the city. Inside sat 2 senior partners from the legal firm conducting the investigation, a representative from HR, and a board member I barely recognized. Clarissa wasn't there. Ms. Anders, one of the investigators began, thank you for agreeing to meet with us. We're hoping you can clarify a few matters surrounding your recent termination and related internal concerns. Eleanor spoke before I could respond. My client is prepared to provide full transparency, but I want to be clear. This meeting is not a favor. It is a courtesy. You will treat her with the respect and seriousness she was denied during her employment. The investigator nodded quickly. Understood. I laid out everything. The Baxter account, the manipulated files, the memo Ava discovered, the pattern of disappearances, Henry, Brian, my access being revoked, the vendor invoice irregularities, the conversations I documented, and finally, Ava's audio recording. When I pressed play on my phone, Clarissa's voice filled the room. We can't have people digging into every little mistake. If that means cutting a few loose ends, so be it. No one spoke when the clip ended. One of the board members pressed his lips into a thin line. The HR rep looked down and scribbled something nervously. We'll need to authenticate the source, the investigator said, though his voice was noticeably tighter. Do that, Eleanor replied. In the meantime, my client will be filing a formal whistleblower disclosure. You can either cooperate or fight, but I suggest you start listening, because this time, Lizzie will be heard. When we left the building, the air felt different. Lighter, sharper. Outside, Ava was waiting on the steps. They pulled me into a meeting this morning, she said breathlessly. I told them everything. The fake training program, the false promises, the pressure to backdate documents. I'm done covering for her. I nodded. You did the right thing. No, Ava said. You did. I just finally followed your lead. Later that night, I received a message from Brian. Clarissa's suspended. The investigation is expanding. They're reopening past terminations. They're calling it a culture audit. Whatever you started, it's working. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to exhale fully. Not because it was over, but because the lie was unraveling. And the truth? The truth was finally louder than her voice. It was a quiet Wednesday morning when I received the email that changed everything. Subject: Resolution and Reinstatement Proposal. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. The message was brief: a formal acknowledgement of wrongdoing, a full retraction of my termination, reinstatement of my role with back pay, continuation of my benefits, pension, and seniority, and a final paragraph that felt like more than just words. We recognize that Ms. Anders acted with integrity, professionalism, and concern for the well-being of this organization. We deeply regret the treatment she received, and we thank her for bringing critical issues to our attention. It was signed by the board. Not Clarissa, because Clarissa was no longer with NorthBridge Consulting. The investigation had revealed more than expected: falsified documents, retaliatory terminations, and a string of quietly covered-up ethics violations that stretched back nearly 5 years. HR was implicated in enabling her decisions. So was one of the board members. By the time the final report was complete, Clarissa had been formally terminated for cause, with no severance. 2 HR managers were also dismissed, and NorthBridge had begun a complete internal overhaul of its compliance structure, including a new Ethics and Accountability Task Force. They invited me to lead it. I declined. I didn't want to spend the rest of my career cleaning up someone else's mess. I wanted to do something that felt like building, not fixing. So instead, I accepted a separate offer from a nonprofit that supports whistleblowers and workplace fairness initiatives across the country. I became a speaker, a mentor, a guide for people who felt silenced, scared, and small. People like I once was. I kept Eleanor on speed dial, and I kept Ava in my life too. She'd officially resigned from NorthBridge and taken a new job with a firm that valued transparency. We met for coffee a few weeks after everything settled. She looked lighter. "I can't stop thinking about the day you were fired," she said. The silence in the office. No one said a word, including me. I nodded. "You were scared. So was I. But you stood up." "I stood up when it hurt. That's the difference." She smiled at that. "You taught me that strength doesn't always look loud." We talked about the others who had come forward. Brian, who now led compliance training. A former finance assistant who uncovered more falsified ledgers. Even Henry Walters, who had reached out from across the country after hearing what happened. "Guess I wasn't crazy," he wrote. "She made me think I was." NorthBridge issued a public statement 6 months after the investigation concluded. They acknowledged a pattern of retaliatory leadership, praised those who had come forward, and pledged ongoing reform. I read it without emotion. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't need their apology to know what I'd done was right. Sometimes justice doesn't come with applause. It comes with quiet reforms, with silent acknowledgments, with policies rewritten because someone refused to stay silent. And that was enough. 1 year later, I received an invitation in the mail. It was from NorthBridge's new CEO, a woman named Miriam who'd been brought in to clean house. She was launching a new leadership program focused on ethical management. The keynote speaker slot? She offered it to me. I thought long and hard about accepting. At first, I almost said no, but then I remembered something Eleanor said during our last meeting. "You didn't just expose the problem, Lizzie. You rewrote the playbook." So I walked into that conference hall in a navy blue suit. The same kind of suit Clarissa used to wear like armor. But on me, it didn't feel like armor. It felt like clarity. When I stepped up to the podium, the room fell silent. I looked out over the crowd of bright eyes and anxious postures. People trying to climb the ladder. People trying to stay afloat. People just trying to do the right thing. And I said this. I was once called a stupid girl. I was told I was never the smart one. I was fired in front of my coworkers and laughed at while I packed my things. But here's the thing about being underestimated. When they don't see you coming, they don't see the strength you've been building. Quietly, carefully, brick by brick. If you are in a room where speaking the truth costs you everything, then you are not in a room that deserves you. And you don't have to burn everything down to rise. Sometimes you just have to leave the door open, so the next person behind you knows which way is out. The room erupted into applause, but I didn't smile for them. I smiled for myself. Because finally, my voice was the loudest thing in the room.